permission, before I make my statement, may I too recognise the work of Yvonne Marie Blenkinsop and others, and indeed all those over the years who have campaigned to ensure that those in the workplace can have the degree of safety and security that they need. With permission, Mr Speaker, I would like to make a statement on the Government's work to deliver Brexit by putting forward a new deal that members of this House can stand behind. We need to see Brexit through, to honour the result of the referendum and to deliver the change the British people so clearly demanded. I sincerely believe that most members of this House feel the same, that for all our division and disagreement, we believe in democracy, that we want to make good on the promise we made to the British people when we asked them to decide on the future of our EU membership. As to how we make that happen, recent votes have shown that there is no majority in this House for leaving with no deal, and this House has voted against revoking Article 50. It is clear that the only way forward is leaving with a deal, but it is equally clear that this will not happen without compromise on all sides of the debate. That starts with the Government, which is why we've just held 6 weeks of detailed talks with the Opposition, talks that the Leader of the Opposition chose to end before a formal agreement was reached, but which nonetheless revealed areas of common ground. And having listened to the Opposition, to other party leaders, to the devolved administrations, to business leaders, trade unionists and others, we're now making a 10-point offer to members across the House. 10 changes that address the concerns raised by honourable and right honourable members. 10 binding commitments that will be enshrined in legislation so they cannot simply be ignored. And 10 steps that will bring us closer to the bright future that awaits our country once we end the political impasse and get Brexit done. First, we will protect British jobs by seeking as close to frictionless trade in goods with the EU as possible while outside the single market and ending free movement. The Government will be placed under a legal duty to negotiate our future relationship on this basis. Second, we will provide much-needed certainty for our vital manufacturing and agricultural sectors by keeping up to date with EU rules for goods and agri-food products that are relevant to checks at the border. Such a commitment, which will also be enshrined in legislation, will help protect thousands of skilled jobs that depend on just-in-time supply chains. Third, we will empower Parliament to break the deadlock over future customs arrangements. Both the Government and Opposition agree that we must have as close as possible to frictionless trade at the UK-EU border, protecting the jobs and livelihoods that are sustained by our existing trade with the EU. But while we agree on the ends, we disagree on the means. The Government has already put forward a proposal which delivers the benefits of a customs union, but with the ability for the UK to determine its own trade and development policy. The Opposition are both sceptical of our ability to negotiate that and don't believe an independent trade policy is in the national interest. They would prefer a comprehensive customs union with a UK say in EU trade policy, but with the EU negotiating on our behalf. As part of the cross-party discussions, the Government offered a compromise option of a temporary customs union on goods only, including a UK say in relevant EU trade policy, so that the next Government can decide its preferred direction. But we were not able to reach agreement. So instead, we will commit in law to let Parliament decide this issue and to reflect the outcome of this process in legislation. Fourth, to address concerns that a future Government could roll back hard-won protections for employees, we will publish a new workers' rights bill. As I've told the House many times, successive British administrations of all colours have granted British workers rights and protections well above the standards demanded by Brussels. But I know that people want guarantees, and I'm happy to provide them. If passed by Parliament, this bill will guarantee that the rights enjoyed by British workers can be no less favourable than those of their counterparts in the EU, both now and in the future. And we will discuss further amendments with trade unions and business. Fifth, the new Brexit deal will also guarantee there will be no change in the level of environmental protection when we leave the EU, and we will establish a new and wholly independent Office of Environmental Protection, able to uphold standards and enforce compliance. Sixth, the Withdrawal Agreement Bill will place a legal duty on Government to seek changes to the political declaration that will be needed to reflect this new deal. I'm confident we will be successful in doing so. Seventh, the Government will include in the Withdrawal Agreement Bill, at introduction, a requirement to vote on whether to hold a second referendum. I've made my own view clear on this many times. I am against a second referendum. We should be implementing the result of the first referendum, not asking the British people to vote in a second one. What would it say about our democracy if the biggest vote in our history were to be rerun because this House didn't like the outcome? What would it do to that democracy, and what forces would it unleash? But I recognise the genuine and sincere strength of feeling across the House on this important issue. So to those MPs who want a second referendum to confirm the deal, I say you need a deal and therefore a withdrawal agreement bill to make it happen. Let it have its second reading and then make your case to Parliament. If this House votes for a referendum, it would be requiring the Government to make provisions for such a referendum, including legislation if it wanted to ratify the withdrawal agreement. Eighth, Parliament will be guaranteed a much greater role in the second part of the Brexit process, the negotiations over our future relationship with the EU. In line with the proposal put forward by the honourable members for Wigan and Stoke-on-Trent Central, the new Brexit deal will set out in law that the House of Commons will approve the UK's objectives for the negotiations, and MPs will also be asked to approve the treaty governing that relationship before the Government signs it. Ninth, the new Brexit deal will legally oblige the Government to seek to conclude the alternative arrangements process by December 2020, avoiding any need for the Northern Ireland backstop coming into force. This commitment is made in the spirit of the amendment tabled by my honourable friend, the member for Altrincham and Sale West, passed by this House on the 29th of January. And while it is not possible to use alternative arrangements to replace the backstop in the withdrawal agreement, we will ensure they are a viable alternative. And finally, 10th, we will ensure that, should the backstop come into force, Great Britain will stay aligned with Northern Ireland. We will prohibit the proposal that a future government could split Northern Ireland off from the UK's customs territory, and we will deliver on our commitments to Northern Ireland in the December 2017 joint report in full. We will implement paragraph 50 of the joint report in law. The Northern Ireland Assembly and Executive will have to give their consent on a cross-community basis for new regulations which are added to the backstop. And we will work with our confidence and supply partners on how these commitments should be entrenched in law, so that Northern Ireland cannot be separated from the United Kingdom. Following the end of EU election purdah, the Withdrawal Agreement Bill will be published on Friday, so the House has the maximum possible time to study its detail. If Parliament passes the bill before the summer recess, the UK will leave the EU by the end of July. We will be out of the EU political structures, out of ever closer union. We will stop British laws being enforced by a European court. We will end free movement. We will stop making vast annual payments to the EU budget. By any definition, that alone is delivering Brexit. And by leaving with a deal, we can do so much more besides. We can protect jobs, guarantee workers' rights, maintain the close security partnerships that do so much to keep us all safe. We will ensure that there is no hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. And we can bring an end to the months, years of increasingly bitter argument and division that have both polarised and paralysed our politics. We can move on, move forwards and get on with the jobs we were sent here to do, what we got into politics to do. That is what we can achieve if we support this new deal. Reject it, and all we have before us is division and deadlock. We risk leaving with no deal, something this House is clearly against. We risk stopping Brexit altogether, something the British people would simply not tolerate. We risk creating further divisions. We risk creating further divisions at a time when we need to be acting together in the national interest. And we guarantee a future in which our politics become still more polarised and voters increasingly despair as they see us failing to do what they asked of us. None of us want to see that happen. The opportunity of Brexit is too large and the consequences of failure too grave to risk further delay. So in the weeks ahead, there will be opportunities for MPs on all sides to have their say, to table amendments, to shape the Brexit they and their constituents want to see. Mr. Speaker, in time, another Prime Minister will be standing at this dispatch box. But while I am here, I have a duty to be clear with the House. I have a duty to be clear with the House about the facts. If we are going to deliver Brexit in this Parliament, we are going to have to pass a Withdrawal Agreement Bill. And we will not do so without holding votes on the issues that have divided us the most. That includes votes on customs arrangements and on a second referendum. We can pretend otherwise and carry on arguing and getting nowhere. But in the end, our job in this House is to take decisions, not to duck them. So I will put those decisions to this House, because that is my duty, and because it is the only way that we can deliver Brexit. So let's demonstrate what this House can achieve. Let's come together, honour the referendum, deliver what we promised the British people, and build a successful future for our whole country. And I commend this statement to the House.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Prime Minister for an advance copy of this statement. In fact, I received it yesterday when the Prime Minister made an appeal entitled Seeking Common Ground in Parliament. And where did she make that appeal? Not in Parliament, but in a small room just down the road. Mr. Speaker, it's now clear the bold New Deal the Prime Minister promised is little more than a repackaged version of her 3 times rejected deal. The rhetoric may have changed, but the deal has not. I thank the Prime Minister for her letter. It offers no change on a customs union, no change on single market alignment, and no dynamic alignment on environmental protections. This government is too weak, too divided to get this country out of the mess that they have created. For over 2 years, the Prime Minister bullishly refused to consult the public or Parliament. She did not seek a compromise until after she had missed her own deadline to leave. And by the time she finally did, she had lost the authority to deliver. That became evident during the 6 weeks of cross-party talks that ended last week. Talks that were entered into constructively on both sides to see if a compromise was possible. But, Mr. Speaker, while those talks are going on, Cabinet Minister after Cabinet Minister made statements undermining what their colleagues in the room were offering. The Foreign Secretary, Leader of the House, International Trade Secretary and Treasury Chief Secretary all made clear they would not tolerate a deal which included a customs union. While Tory leadership contender after Tory leadership contender took it in turns to make it absolutely clear that any compromise deal would not be honoured. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, no matter what the Prime Minister offers, it's clear no compromise would survive the upcoming Tory leadership contest. The multiple leaks reported from the Cabinet yesterday show the Prime Minister couldn't even get the compromise deal she wanted through her own Cabinet. And it's clear that the shrunken offer that emerged satisfied no one. Not her own backbenchers, not the DUP, and, Mr. Speaker, not the official opposition either. No Labour MP can vote for a deal on the promise of a Prime Minister who only has days left in her job. And even if the Prime Minister could honour her promises, the deal she is putting before us does not represent a genuine compromise. Her 10-point plan is riddled with contradiction and wishful thinking. Firstly, the Prime Minister pretends she's delivering something new with a temporary customs union. This isn't a compromise, it's just accepting the reality. Under the withdrawal agreement, we will already be in a temporary customs union through the transition period, which can last for up to 4 years. And if not, we will enter the backstop, which in effect keeps us in a customs union too, without any say. Secondly, why would this House legislate for a plan which has already been comprehensively rejected by the European Union? The government wants to align with the European Union on goods to keep frictionless trade, while at the same time wants to pursue trade deals which would undermine this process. It's simply not compatible. The technology they need to continue to pursue their Chequers plan simply doesn't exist. It's already been ruled by the EU as illegal, impractical, and an invitation to fraud. And, Mr. Speaker, the government has failed to provide any economic analysis to show this would make us better off. Why would the House support such a chaotic and desperate approach? Labour set out a sensible compromise plan over a year ago, including a comprehensive and permanent customs union with the EU that gives us a say, that would allow us to strike trade deals as part of the world's biggest trading bloc, bring investment while maintaining the highest standards. It's credible and achievable, and the best way to protect industry, manufacturing of jobs, something this government is woefully indifferent to, as the latest crisis in the steel industry shows today. The government must be prepared to step in and take a public stake to save thousands of high-skilled jobs at British Steel, a foundation industry for any major economy. Instead, the Tory obsession is for striking trade deals with the likes of Donald Trump. They prioritise chlorinated chicken, further NHS privatisation and deregulation over protecting supply chains and jobs in this country. On workers' rights, Mr. Speaker, we have yet to see the full package the government intends to bring forward. But many in the trade union movement remain very sceptical. As Frances O'Grady of the Trade Union Congress said yesterday, and I quote, "This reheated Brexit deal won't protect people's jobs and rights." On environmental protections, it's clear the Prime Minister is not offering dynamic alignment, and that under her proposals, the United Kingdom would fall behind in a number of areas, with only a toothless regulator under the control of the Environment Secretary in place of binding international commitments to protect our environment. Finally, Mr. Speaker, on the issue of a confirmatory vote, I'm sure nobody here will be fooled by what the Prime Minister is offering. Will the Prime Minister tell us now if this offer is genuine? Will she give her party a free vote on this issue, or will she, as before, whip against a confirmatory referendum? If the government truly believes this is the best deal for the economy and for jobs, they should not fear putting that to the people. Mr. Speaker, for too long our politics has been seen through a prism of leave or remain. This is dividing our society and poisoning our democracy. It means vital issues are being neglected: the crisis in our schools and hospitals, the housing crisis, and the cruelty of the social security policy and universal credit. Our country needs leadership to bring us together. However, this Prime Minister is not the person to do that. Throughout the last 3 years, she's made no attempt to unite the country. She's been focused only on keeping her divided party together, and it hasn't worked. And her time has now run out. She no longer has the authority to offer a compromise and cannot deliver. That's why it's time for a general election to break the Brexit deadlock and give the country a say.
Prime Minister!
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I think the game was actually given away by the right honourable gentleman when he made it absolutely clear that, as far as he is concerned, the way to get this through the House is for everybody else to compromise to his plan and only his plan. In his statement, he was very clear that he was not making any proposals to compromise. The government has indeed compromised. We have recognised that there are issues on which this House will need to decide, and that is the plain fact. There are different opinions across this House on the two key issues of the future customs arrangement and the second referendum. I've made my position very clear on these. The government has set out its position, but it is for this House to decide, and the best vehicle to do this is within the Withdrawal Agreement Bill. So then this House can finally make its mind up as to what it wants the future customs arrangement to be and as to whether it thinks there should be a second referendum. He talks about free votes on a second referendum. Well, of course, in the indicative vote process that went through, we did indeed give Conservative members a free vote on this issue, and the second referendum was rejected across the House. He talks about he has some inaccurate comments. He talked about the environmental regulator. It will be an independent body which is able to hold the government to account on the issue of environmental standards. I think he showed his blinkered view on trade when what he sets out is, as far as he seems to be concerned, the only issue, the only people he wants to trade with are European Union. Actually, what we want to see is a good trade deal with the EU and good trade deals with other countries around the world. That is the best way forward for the United Kingdom. And he talked about British Steel, and I've answered in response to questions in PMQs on British Steel and what the government is doing. He talks about the Labour position of wanting a comprehensive customs union and of wanting all that dynamic alignment and that single market. I have to say to the right honourable gentleman that what the Labour Party wants to achieve in its relationship with the EU would make it even harder for a British government to take action to protect industries like the steel industry. He himself has always complained about state aid rules, but he would be wanting to tie himself into those state aid rules by what he is proposing for the future. But then, of course, what we see, he talks about different opinions. He talks about different opinions across this House. Of course, the one issue that has never properly been resolved in this House, and which the Withdrawal Agreement Bill would force to be resolved in this House, is whether the right honourable gentleman himself is for Brexit or against it. If he is for Brexit, he will vote for the Withdrawal Agreement Bill. Voting against the Withdrawal Agreement Bill is voting against Brexit.